time to start. Okay, got it. Okay, well, welcome everybody. Good afternoon. So glad you came to join us today for this collaboration between Lifetime Learning Nova and AARP. This expands our view basically nationally. So, and we're all in very good luck today because we have Sara Shoob, who is one of our regular presenters each semester and has done that for many years, who will be talking today about making connections, revisiting favorites, and exploring new relationships in art. But I think, I don't know if Trudy wants to make a few comments or if she wants, maybe you should start with that. And then I will introduce Sara officially.
Okay, very good. Yeah, I never miss an opportunity to talk, that's for sure. Good afternoon. I'm Trudy Murata. I'm a volunteer community ambassador with AARP here in Northern Virginia. And from our earliest beginnings, AARP has championed lifetime learning. And that's why AARP Virginia is thrilled to be collaborating with the Lifetime Learning Institute of Northern Virginia to bring our members a sampling of the rich programs that are offered by LLI Nova each semester. The link to their website is in the chat box. It is LLI Nova, LLINOVA.org. If you'd like to use the opportunity after today's presentation to take a look at exactly what they do offer in both their programs and their tours and other information that they provide. And with that, Phil, I'll send it back to you. Thanks for letting us join you.
Okay, all right. I think it's Patty's turn.
I think it is. Hi, I'm Patty Rose. I'm the current vice president of LLI Nova, and we are affiliated with the Annandale campus of Northern Virginia Community College. We firmly believe that we offer the best bang for your buck when it comes to lifetime learning, especially in this area. For a very, very minor annual fee, we offer access to more than 120 classes, both virtual and in-person, year-round. We have access, we have memberships in special interest groups. We have monthly speaker forums. We have, again, it's a combination of virtual and in-person for the speaker forums. We participate in social events, and of course, we offer the chance to meet new people and develop new friendships. Our members also enjoy access to significantly discounted tickets to concerts and plays at places like the Kennedy Center or George Mason University and other venues through our visual and performing arts committee. We also offer reasonably priced regional day and overnight trips, and have recently activated our overseas study travel program. In fact, we're kicking that off with a trip to Ireland in the late spring. For just a taste of things that you could do as a member, we're having a visit to the Lewis Ginter Botanic Garden in Richmond, Virginia in late spring. There's an afternoon tea at Cafe Renaissance, which includes all of the sandwiches, scones, and sweets that you expect. We're going to tour the historic gardens at Tudor Place in Dumbarton Oaks in Georgetown. And then we have an upcoming evening of jazz with Northern Virginia's own Metropolitan Jazz Orchestra, and also a presentation of heritage and cultural experiences through authentic dance by the Indigenous Enterprise, which is a group of champion dancers from Native America and Canadian tribes and nations. Our special interest groups run the gamut from photography to bridge to foodies to 2 book clubs to tabletop games. And I think that if you visit our website, you'll find something of interest, and we strongly encourage you to take a look. And if you're interested, join us. And I will throw it back to Phil now.
Great, thank you.
Excuse me, may I have that website address again, please?
llinova.org. It's in the chat box.
Also, the direct links are in the chat box.
Yes. Okay.
I'm not getting all the chat for some reason.
Okay. Well, right now I think we have to start the session. So I will check back with you later. You stay on. We can work that out. So anyway, I'd like to introduce again Sara Shoob. She's got a background in teaching and educational administration, but when she retired, she started pursuing her passion for art by becoming a docent at the Smithsonian American Art Museum and Renwick Gallery. She's presented a number of classes for LLI through the years and just loves sharing her passion for art. And I can say she always brings new insights and fresh ideas to all of her presentations. So welcome again. Good afternoon. Sara, it's all yours. And if you have comments, questions, please put them in the chat box. Thank you.
Right. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to see you. It might be morning for some people since you all are from afar. When we started planning this presentation, Phil and I talked about what we could do that was unique. And the Smithsonian American Art Museum is the museum that I'm a docent at. And it's also under the umbrella of the Smithsonian American Art Museum is the Renwick Gallery for Decorative and Contemporary Craft. So we had done programs for years, and I tried to think of a way that we could make connections between some of our favorite works of art and some of the new acquisitions that we have. So initially, that was the plan. And then there's also an exhibit at the museum right now called Artist to Artist. And that is a small exhibit, but it combines work by two artists who somehow in their life's trajectories interacted with each other. So I wanted to put those together with the new connections that our group was going to make. Now I have to tell you, this is our museum for those from far away. This is the Smithsonian American Art Museum and the beautiful courtyard. Whoops, what happened there? I don't know. I've never seen that. And then this, how do I get rid of it? Annotate, maybe. I've never seen that little line. You learn something new every day, don't you? I don't want this to be here the whole time. Okay. That's enough to panic me to start. Let's go back here. So this is the museum. And then down in the right-hand corner is the Renwick, which is a very historic building in Washington that was built in 1860 to be the museum for William Corcoran. Anyway, so I got a little bit flustered there. When you go to a museum, you make connections. You make connections with your culture, with your personal experience. So you already bring a connection to the art you see. Sometimes the curators make connections for you by the way they hang works of art or what they tell you about the connections between some artists or the kind of work that they create. And obviously, docents come with another bag of tricks, and they really want to make sure that they make connections and help you make connections. There was someone who asked the addresses of the two museums. I don't have the actual physical address of the Smithsonian American Art Museum. It's between 7th and 9th and F and G Street. And it shares the building with the Portrait Gallery. And then the Renwick is catty corner from the White House, actually. All right, so with that all said, I want to start with the first connection. One of the works of art that all of the LLI people love in the Smithsonian American Art Museum is this painting of Mrs. George Watson, which you know was, as you see from my information on the screen, is a painting by John Singleton Copley. And Copley had really very minimal training, and he started out as a painter of miniatures. But he gained an incredible following. He's an amazing artist, and only the very wealthy could pay for his works of art. As you notice, this is a pretty large work of art. Mrs. George Watson, notice, I don't even remember her first name, but you know, she went by her husband's name. She was the wife of a merchant. This was painted in 1865, around the time of the French and Indian War. She was 19 when this was painted. During her life, she had 4 children. Obviously her husband was very wealthy. He was a Tory, and he, when the Revolutionary War began, he actually went back to England. But notice what he's doing here and what she is doing here. They've picked this extraordinary silk dress, and Mrs. Watson and her husband want you to notice the imported goods, the lace, the vase probably from Holland, and the tulip. And the tulip is probably the most expensive item in this painting because it was so rare. Notice his facility with this lace and with her face. So in the same room as this painting with other paintings from the Revolutionary War period is this huge vessel. And notice it's untitled. So why did the curators put this huge vessel in the same room with these portraits? So first of all, I want to tell you a little bit about this vessel. It was created by a man named David Drake. And he was born around 1800, and he was enslaved, but he was a master ceramicist. And you notice this is quite a large vessel, and it has this beautiful glaze, which is common to South Carolina. He lived in Edgewood, South Carolina, and he created this about the time of the Civil War. And it's called a verse jar for a very interesting reason. At the top of the jar is writing that he did. Believe it or not, I'm going to show you a little close-up of where the writing is, right at the top of the jar. I'm going to go back. And so there's an inscription on this jar that says, "A noble jar for pork or beef, they carry it round to the Indian chief." So this man who was enslaved signed his work and wrote these little poems. If you notice, it says LM, November 9th, 1860. LM stands for Lewis Miles, who is his enslaver, who is his owner. And this is the only work of art that we know that was signed by an enslaved artisan. And he is taking an enormous risk. You know, in South Carolina, people who were enslaved were outlawed from learning how to read. So somehow this guy, Dave Drake, learned how to read Not only that, but he inscribed the vessel, which is really rather subversive and very brave of him. But he was a master and he was needed on the plantation. He gets his freedom in 1863, and that's when he takes the last name of Drake. So we have to say, why do you think these curators put these two works in the same room? And we can certainly look at the imported vase that Mrs. Watson had, and it was much easier and cheaper to make your own in the colonies than to import it. So we are looking at sort of that transition from, you know, these wealthy merchants to what life was like in Civil War era America. Any thoughts here? I don't see anything in the chat. By the way, I should have told you that if you have questions, Phil will look for questions, and also you can write your questions in the chat box or any comments that you have. I can see the chat box as well. And I think that somebody did have their hand up. Sharon, you can unmute yourself if you'd like to ask your question.
How would the average guest, viewer, patron of this museum know this? So the curator is acting very elitist, assuming we know these connections, and that's where I have a bit of a challenge here.
Well, and that clearly is a challenge, no doubt about it. I would say that's why you need to take a docent tour, but I'm just being a little facetious here. There's a lot of captioning around this vessel, and so you will understand it from the captioning around the vessel. And there's not too much written by Mrs. Watson, and so there's that kind of disconnect there. But clearly, you know, you can get the idea that Mrs. Watson was very wealthy, and the things that she used were imported. So I think you asked a good question, and it's clearly, you know, I always say to people, if you can go to a museum, that's a huge if, and get somebody to explain it to you or listen to earphones, great, because you get so much more out of it.
Somebody
says,
wrote,
yeah, isn't it possible Dave was encouraged by his master? You know, we don't know that whole story. How did Dave learn to read and write? His master could have been jailed for teaching one of his enslaved people to write and read. So it was really an act of bravery by this guy, Dave. But that's part of the story that we don't know. All right, so one of the other things that we can do as docents is show you our favorite works. And notice the size of this work of art. It's gigantic. It takes up a huge wall in the museum. It's by Thomas Moran, who was an extraordinary landscape painter. And he's known a lot for his vision of the American West landscape. And in 1871, he was asked by the Haydn Geological Survey to come with them to explore the Yellowstone region. And on this trip, he recorded information notes about what they did, their daily progress, and he made many, many sketches of what he saw on this trip. On this trip, there was another survey member whose name was William Henry Jackson, who was a photographer. And you know, we've got to know that in 1871, the photography was black and white. You had a lot of equipment, you had to set it up. But between the two of them, with their sketches, with their photography. They really helped convince Congress to establish the national park system. So this work of art it took him quite a while to do. Everyone always says, why did it take so long? You know, he could have easily had it in his studio and he'd look at it and make some changes and say, oh, I could fix this or whatever. But, and I'm sure he was working on other things at the same time. There are two earlier works by him that are part of the Department of Interior. And those were earlier and they were done a little more quickly. I want you to notice what the artist did here to draw your attention to the waterfall. He has those diagonal lines of the mountains. He has the light blue of the waterfall, the rich blue of the river, and this cloudy mist above the waterfall. You can also see how it's lit. You know, it's lit from above. The sun is shining that day, but part of this is also in the shade. Moran's work is just incredible. So the work that I am pairing with this is a work by a woman named Kay Walking Stick, who's a member of the Cherokee Nation. And this is one of our newest works. This is a new acquisition. And I want you to look at this. And in a minute, we're gonna look at the two of them together. But I want you to notice the mountains. And I also want you to notice this Native American design that she puts into a lot of her work. This is a very large work of art also, and it's on 2 panels. And you can't see the 2 panels here very well. But that's a typical style that she uses. And so in this case, she's blending the landscape with the spiritual dimension of the Native American symbolism. So I might ask you to think about what these 2 paintings have in common, besides the fact that they're natural paintings, paintings of nature. If there's anyone who wants to put something in the chat, that's great. I want you also to notice the diagonals in both, the way the artist V-shape, right, Mary? The way both artists draw your attention to the center, and they have a very similar color palette too. Oh, Susan, interesting. Colors in motion in the sky. That's very interesting. And they both, this one has a very high horizon line. This one, we don't really know quite where the horizon line is, but it's definitely a little bit higher than our eye view. And the same scale, we have this river coming through here. We don't see the source of the river, but it's there. Kay Walking Stick is a very famous American Indian artist right now. And this is a very typical style for her. I was just in Florida and there was another work, and I didn't even have to go over to where it was because it was another landscape with American Indian symbolism. It's not necessarily writing. And the lighting contrasts. we don't know what these particular symbols are, and she uses different ones from different tribes. So we don't know that this is a Cherokee symbol. It could be a symbol for a group of people who are in the West. All right, let's go on. Now, the next works of art that I'm going to show you are in this artist to artist exhibit right now. And, you know, we kind of think of artists sitting in their studios working by themselves, but really they are interacting with other artists all the time. They might be looking for mentorship. They might be looking for inspiration. We wonder if Kay Walking Stick saw the Morans. You know, life isn't life is social for these artists. And so they get a sense of solidarity and a shared purpose from other artists. And sometimes they're the first critics, even before the critics or the curators start looking at their work. So I'm going to show you some relationships between interesting artists. I'm going to show you one painting. We're going to take a quick look at it. I'm going to show you a second artwork, and then we'll look at the two of them together. And as I said, it's in a small exhibit called Artist to Artist and New on View. There are works here that I had never seen before they were put on the wall. Okay, so some of you might know Thomas Hart Benton. He was a regionalist. He lived in the Kansas City area, and he really catapulted to fame in about the 1950s when Time magazine wrote an article about him as the new hero of American art. And this work of art is a huge mural. It was actually conceived for Hartsfield's department store in Kansas City, and it was conceived to sit above the elevators. Remember that? You guys are all AARP people. We remember when the elevators took us up the floors, and there was even somebody who was sitting on the elevator. During the 1930s, during the Depression, American art was really focused on depictions of rural life that were reassuring and appealing to Americans. We wanted to find the best of life. Now, this is a little bit later, but it's still in that vein of finding the best. And what I've done is I've kind of zeroed in on the center part of this mural. And I really want you to look at it. And I'm just going to tell you a little quick story. It's called Echolas and Hercules. So not only is it a painting of the West, but it also is a painting of Greek mythology. And here, Hercules is fighting for with Echolas, who's the god of the river, for the hand of Deianira, who's over here. And she's a goddess of farmlands. And during flood season, Echolas can turn into a bull. And with his horns, he carves out the river during flood season. And so this is a story of Greek mythology connected to life in the West. And, you know, for those of you, I'm going to go back to the large mural. Whoops. And you can see Hercules is going to win here. He's going to break the horn of Echolas, which is going to turn into the cornucopia. And notice this painting was done in 1947, and that is after World War II, and that's when the United States bounty is feeding Europe as part of the Marshall Plan. So again, that's part of this story of this incredible mural. This African-American man who's coming over the fence might have been someone who fought in World War II and is now looking to enter society. And I lost my cursor. And so Thomas Hart Benton put that in the painting too. Now I want to tell you about one of Thomas Hart Benton's students. Thomas Hart Benton, before he went back to Missouri, he taught in New York. And this is a painting by one of his students. Anybody want to take a guess who painted this? This is really a trick question. Oh, Rena, you knew. Yes, it is Jackson Pollock. But notice the style of this. Jackson Pollock did not think he had talent. He really felt that he didn't have natural artistic skill. And Benton really mentored him his whole life. Jackson Pollock came from kind of a poor family with kind of a dark background, and Benton really gave Pollock some stability. And so I'm going to show you, Pollock did this painting and he entitled it Going West, and he did it in the mid-30s. And it certainly is dark, but notice the motion here. And there's a driver taking taking his cattle. And, you know, an early Pollock work, you see some connections here. You definitely notice the movement, the theme of the West. And interestingly enough, Jackson Pollock gave this painting to Benton when Benton moved back to Missouri as a gift. And then Benton later gave it to the Smithsonian. But what I really also want to focus on here is how a mentor and his mentee changed, and really they did a role reversal. In the 1930s, it was Benton at the top of his career, you know, the hero of American art. And then by when was that? In the end of the 1940s, Life magazine had a whole article about Pollock, calling him the greatest living painter in the United States. And that was after Pollock had started his drip paintings, which made him so famous. Benton never did any abstract work, and he kind of ended up being a has-been, but really it was Pollock who catapulted to fame. So it's interesting that the curators called this a role reversal and put Benton and Pollock next to each other on the wall. Any other thoughts? Fe? Well, I hate to ask, Daisy, what does that mean? Two other artists that were very close were Paul Cadmus and the next artist that I'll show you after this, whose name is Paul Tooker. This painting is called Night in Bologna. It's egg tempera on fiberboard. So egg tempera is a very hard medium to work with. Notice what's happening in this painting. I have to, show you this diagonal line. So, artists use a diagonal line to focus your eye. They're very smart about that kind of thing. But also we have this soldier who's looking at this woman who's over here, whose back is toward the soldier, and then she is looking at this man who's right here, and I've tried to blow it up with his little suitcase, and he's not looking at her, but he's looking back at the soldier, which, you know, I think is very interesting. We have a triangle here, and each of these figures is observing another figure, but they're really not interacting with each other. None of them really feel seen in this particular painting. I'm going back to Gretchen's comment. Perhaps Apollo depicts the Dust Bowl migration west. And that's, you know, it's possible. The Dust Bowl was in the 30s, certainly. And the artists during the 30s, some of them did portray the Dust Bowl, but when they were hired by the WPA to paint as part of Roosevelt's programs, they were really told to paint something that was positive. It was a tough time. Okay, so this is the good friend of Paul Cadmus. These two men were lifelong friends. For a time, they were probably lovers in New York. They were part of a queer group of artists who shared studio space in Greenwich Village. They spent their summers on Fire Island. During this time, people like Jackson Pollock and the abstract expressionists were hard at work, but these men did not respond to that. Their work was much more of a realistic style, even though I'm not sure we call this totally realistic. So here, this is called the waiting room. And I'm going to put the two pictures next to each other in a minute, but I want you to notice, we really don't know what they're waiting for. There's this man who's looking out kind of back at us. There's people in these booths, which are numbered. It has a flat appearance. It looks like a poster. And notice it's also egg tempera on wood, which is more of a flat medium. So let me show you the two together. Now, as I said, these two men were friends. And is there any similarity in what they're painting, their themes? They're observers. They're all observers. They're disconnected. Yes, they're not connected to each other. There's a sense of loneliness. They're both in urban environments. There's a separateness. And it's exactly right. So, and here we have vertical lines, and we also have vertical lines here as well. Even this, I just noticed this to think about it. This line directs your eye back, and there's even a little bit of a diagonal here directing your eye back. The red, the color of red draws your attention. And actually, I just read this morning. I was looking back at my notes, and in the Cadmus one on the right, metaphorically, the soldier in red stands for lust, the woman in yellow stands for greed, and the tourist in green stands for envy. You know, who knew about that before I read that, but it makes sense. But the colors here are very muted, except these reds stand out. And this guy who's, you know, sleeping, there's definitely a feeling of separation and isolation in both of these works of art. And, you know, these two men sought each other for companionship. And did they feel separated and isolated in their lives because of their lifestyles? So it's a very interesting thing to contemplate. And Lila said that the women are in pink. So that's interesting too. How sexist is that? Okay, here's another connection. This woman, for the people who are in Northern Virginia, this is a work by Louis Malou Jones. It's called The Fetishes. And it's pretty much on display all the time. Jones was really a very important person in the Washington, D.C. area. She taught at Howard University, which for those of you from around the country might not know that it's a historically Black college in D.C. And it in the 30s especially, but even later, it was a vibrant hub of Black intellectualism. And Jones joined the faculty in 1930, and she taught art there for 50 years. And she actually had to fight some issues of sexism, but she really was an important key player in the art department at Howard University. Yeah, and going back to the other one, the two major men have very distinctive facial expression, sorry. Okay, so going on with these masks. So Lois Malou Jones went on sabbatical to Paris. She probably saw works of Picasso and all the abstract Cubist painters, and she would paint these African masks. You know, masks have kind of a twofold connotation. They can hide you, but they also represent your culture. So there are two parts of you know, the definition of a mask. And someone said to her, you know, why did you paint these masks? And she said, you know, if Pablo Picasso can take inspiration from art, why not me? It's my heritage. In this painting of these masks, they're kind of floating in space. There are 5 different masks, one here, one here, one here, one here, and then one way over here that doesn't show up very clearly. But she's also showing you the difference in cultures in Africa. There's so many different styles and cultures, and she wants people to understand that. One of her students became extremely famous also, and her name was Elizabeth Catlett. And Elizabeth Catlett was a student of Jones for not too long, but she was one of the best students at Howard, and she too was very affected by the African traditions. And also, she goes on to become the first woman who's the head of the sculpture department at a university in Mexico. So here, she's really kind of connecting the Mexican heads with also with African traditions. And one of her devotions in life really was to show the experiences and lives of African-American women. And this is called Singing Head. And she did it while she was teaching in Mexico. These works were created decades apart, but we have the teacher again and her student. Oh, there is, absolutely. John, thanks for pointing that out. There is a little statue with the mask here. And this is an African statue. In the interest of time, I didn't show you the self-portrait of Louise Malou Jones, but besides the fact that she has her painting palette with her, she also has Black African sculptures in the background of her self-portrait. Thanks for noticing that. Notice how it does stand out too in red. All right. Now, another artist that I find very fascinating is a man named Joseph Cornell. And he was really a loner. I think he lived in New York, in Flushing, New York, with his widowed mother and an invalid brother. And he really lived a very quiet life and didn't get out much. And his whole artistic career, though, in his artistic career, he conjured these amazing worlds in little boxes and frames. And he would collect things and make collages in these little boxes. You know, he would get things from bric-a-brac stores and souvenir stands. And his assemblages, which is what we call them, really mingled fantasy and reality. And it turns out that we have so much of his work at the museum. It's called the Joseph Cornell Study Center. Not only do we have his, a lot of his work that he created, but all his notes and all the little papers that he had and all the little things that he collected. We have box loads of this man's artwork and inspiration in our study center at the museum. And here is his good friend. When the curators were going through his study center, they found 3 little works of art. I'm sorry, I didn't write the size of this. It's small, maybe this big. That's 18 inches by 12 inches. So notice I haven't told you who created this. This woman was a dear friend of his. They would write letters to each other, they would call each other, and they were friends for years and years. She came from Japan in 1957, and she worked in New York, and she developed this pretty innovative body of work. I think I do have the size of it. And look who it is. It's Kusama. We know Kusama now from those amazing pattern paintings that she does, her mirrored infinity rooms. You can't get into these exhibits of hers now because she's so popular. But for quite a while, she was a struggling artist. She interacted with Cornell at some point, and they became fast friends. And at the time, he was pretty well known, and she was a struggling artist, and he knew this. And sometimes he would give her some of his little collages and little things that he designed so she could sell them and get some money. Because he was the famous one. And when the curators were going through his study center, they found 3 of these little works that are watercolors by Kusama that she gave to him. And he kept them. It's actually smaller than I thought, 9 by 12. So, and they had never been exhibited, and they're not even on exhibit now. Watercolor is very, very fragile, and so it's not on display very much. And Elizabeth says that maybe Cornell's little models and little boxes did encourage her to go 3D, and that's, a very possible thing. And certainly she uses a lot of different resources too, different materials. So anyway, they were friends, I think for years until he died. Okay. Oh no, there they are together. Should have. Okay, forgot. I'll leave them up for a minute. They're both sort of cosmic, ethereal in this case. Okay, let's go on. Another artist that we have in our museum, his name is Shiru Obata. And we actually had a huge exhibit of his work a couple of years ago. He came to the United States, I think in the early, I don't have the date, in the early 20s, I believe. And he was an artist in Japan. And when he came to the United States, he became quite well known in the United States, in California, for his drawings and his watercolors. And he really relied on the Japanese community to help him out. He had a lot of talent and ambition. His wife was a ikebana, flower arranger. As he grew more at ease in California, he started giving art demonstrations. He was in huge demand, and he taught at the University of California. He loved the outdoors, as you can see from his work of the Grand Canyon on the right, and he loved traveling. And this exhibit that we had really shows a lot of his work from his travels along the West Coast. But of course, what happened to a lot of Japanese Americans in around World War II was that he was interned in the incarceration camp at Topaz. And so Linda hit it right on the nose. It's this painting on the left, the watercolor, shows these horrible windstorms in Topaz when he was there. He painted a lot of work while he was at Topaz. He also started an art school there. Oh, thanks, Dick. He immigrated in 1903. Thank goodness for Google. Anyway, so he ran an art school at Topaz. And the works that we have on view now next to his are these 2 works by other Japanese immigrants. They both came, this is a husband and wife, Matsusaburo Hibi and Hisako Hibi is his wife. They both came from Japan, and they He opened a school in California to teach art, but they were also interred in Topaz, and they spent 3 years in detention, and they worked with Obata. And when Obata was released, they were in charge of the art school after he left. And I want you to take a look at these two paintings. And they're really very different. I read what both artists said about these two paintings. And notice the one on the left with the coyotes in the camp. And the color scheme, it's dark, it's black. On the back, he wrote, "It was a hard winter in Topaz. The snow lay deep. Big coyotes came out of the desert right up to the camps, and no one dared to go out of doors." It was very threatening. There was definitely a feeling of dread here. That's what the atmosphere conveys. These people lived under constant surveillance with barbed wire. They had lost their freedom. And then there's a painting on the right by his wife. She draws your eyes upward to the clouds. And she's in this oppressive, threatening environment too. But here's what she says: free, free. I want to be free. Free as the clouds I see up above Topaz. So Linda remarked that these clouds are dark, and the artist paints them that way. And you know, if you look at clouds aren't white, the bottom is dark. And she looks up and she sees these clouds, and she's looking for freedom, like the clouds are bird-like. And don't you, when you put birds in artwork, or when you think about birds, you are thinking about freedom. So both artists, all three artists, I could say, in this case, are recalling their life in the incarceration, with all a little bit of a different place. All right, the last two works of art in the artist-to-artist section are works by Puerto Rican artists. This is a work by Juan Sanchez, and it's called Confused Paradise. And notice how paradise is spelled here with a C. Like throwing the dice is what he says. So what I did was I tried to blow up this artwork a little so that you could see it a bit better. Juan Sanchez, he was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1954. And you know, he's really speaking to the complexities of Puerto Rican life in New York. And here, this is the top, and he takes a picture of these kids at this Puerto Rican Day parade. And he wants you to notice this doesn't really make sense, because the little boys, they're not wearing Puerto Rican attire, or they're not wearing anything that shows their culture. They're dressed like American Indians. How confusing is that? The little boys who are dressed as American Indians, their skin might be a little bit darker then this little girl in the middle who's the queen. And, you know, Sanchez calls our attention to this. He writes about it. He says, you know, the costumes mimic American Indians, not life in the Caribbean. And the Mickey Mouse heads, which I'm going to show you next, you can see them a little bit. They kind of talk about how they kind of refer to the way Puerto Rico is referred to like a Disneyland. So he's looking at all these complexities. In this case, the palm tree is upside down. You know, the palm trees were not indigenous to Puerto Rico. And this is like a Taino Indian inscription design on the upside down palm tree. And I'm not sure, I can't remember about the writing here. It's a poet by a Puerto Rican writer. I'm sorry, I don't remember that. But he really views Puerto Rico as an upside down nation living, still living as a colony in the United States. Now, the next artist came to New York quite a bit later. His name is Miguel Luciano, and he really, again, immersed himself in Puerto Rican life in New York City. And he was born in Puerto Rico, but he was raised in the United States. And he was really pretty excited, I guess, to settle in New York. And he got in touch with Juan Sanchez to study art with him. And notice what on the right, my country is a victim, right? Thank you for seeing that. And Ricky asked the Taino Indians were indigenous to the Caribbean area in Puerto Rico. Anyway, so if we look at this, we have a plantain. And it kind of looks like a beautiful sculpture representing a tropical fruit. But there's something hidden in here. This is, what do I want to say? A metal platinum, sorry, I'm like losing my thoughts for a second. This platinum covers a rotting plantain. And he is elevating this rotten plantain to a higher level by covering it with platinum, which is, you know, expensive, and putting it in a museum. And so he really kind of takes us on a journey to look at the meaning of the plantain. It used to be that when Puerto Ricans would come to the United States, there was an expression that was called La Mancha del Platano, which meant the stain of the plantain, which was a way to shame Puerto Ricans who came to America. But now the younger generation of Puerto Ricans really view it as a way of expressing cultural pride. And so Luciano is doing that with how he's elevating this common fruit of Puerto Rico to a higher level. And here the two works together. I should be writing this down about my country is the victim, I cannot return. Thank you very much. A Spanish caption. So I learn from you guys all the time as well. So this is the most recent work of art that's displayed in this artist to artist new on view section of the museum. All right, now we have 20 minutes left, and I'm going to quickly flip over to some works of art that are in the Renwick. And the Renwick is part of the American Art Museum, but it's decorative and contemporary crafts. Right now, we have an exhibit there. It's called This Present Moment, which really focuses on artwork that's been created in the past 3 years and how artists have created artworks, you know, that are related to COVID or global warming or the Me Too movement, or Black Lives Matter, or the environment. But I want to show you a couple of artworks that have an interesting connection in the Renwick. Okay, so the first thing I want to show you are these little sculptures that are made out of this hard watercolor paper. And if you notice, they're kind of folded. The watercolor paper is a special kind of paper that's oval in shape. And these two men, interestingly enough, have a completely different career than making art. They are scientists at MIT. And at 6, Eric and his dad, Martin, were making puzzles. Martin homeschooled Eric. Eric became the youngest professor at MIT. And they work in science and they study folding and unfolding and how it has real life applications. When we get sick, the proteins in our body unfold in the wrong way. There's folding of satellites in space. So these men at MIT study real life applications of folding in space, in the cells of our bodies. Paper folding is huge among scientists and mathematicians, absolutely. You know, so they have mastered origami, I can tell you that. But why am I connecting you with this incredible piece of glass by the master Lino Tagliapietra? Lino Tagliapietra comes from Murano, Italy. He spends half his time, or he used to spend half his time in America and half his time in Murano. He's been a teacher to Chihuly, and he creates these incredible works of art. So you're saying to yourself, okay, what's the connection here? You're welcome. So we look at his incredible skill with glass. And now he is working with Martin Domain. They are developing computer programs to help glass artists make more complicated, interesting glass work. So it's like these two people have somehow come together using their science, their techniques, their computers to work together to help glass artists. Yeah, just look at the curves and surfaces. They're just really beautiful. Just so as they don't have robots making art. When you blow glass like this, it's not one person blowing glass. It's a factory of people. This is pretty amazing, isn't it? Okay, I'm going to show you one of the favorite pieces of, I think, half of the LLI people in the museum. This is called Reclining Dress, and it's by an artist named Sharon Lamont. It's it's life size basically. It is this beautiful piece of artwork, and it's not on view, but in the new exhibit, one of her other works of art is in the new exhibit. So this was just a recent acquisition, but it's by the same artist. And Karen Lamont makes these glass dresses. Now she's making them, I think, in bronze too. She got a Fulbright scholarship to work in Prague, where she could blow glass at this size. It's also, I think, less expensive. And it's a very complex process to create these glass dresses. You first create a mold of a person, then you create the mold of the dress on top of the mold of the person, and you make wax molds, you melt the wax, you pour in the hot glass, and then it sits in a annealing oven for about 60 days. So this is one of our new acquisitions that's related to the glass that we have that we've had for a while. And then some of you might have seen the work of Nick Cave. Nick Cave was trained as a dancer by the Alvin Ailey Dance Company. And he was very affected by the beatings of Rodney King in California. And at one point, he was sitting outside thinking about this, thinking about his life as an undervalued African-American man, somebody who's discarded, and he started picking up these twigs. I think it was near Grant Park, for those of you from California. And he started stringing them together and putting them over a bodysuit and wearing them. And then as he would dance around, the twigs would make noise. And that's why he calls these things sound suits. If you Google Nick Cave, you can see his other sound suits dancing. These particular ones are made for a museum, but you can imagine somebody inside them still dancing. And he calls them, these sound suits, his second skin. He said, you know, when I put them on, nobody can tell if I'm black or white. They can't tell if I'm green or purple. They don't know anything about me. They don't know if I'm a man or a woman. This is my way of almost protecting myself. He makes these sound suits out of beads and fabric and all kinds of things. And this one is, he's got material, quilting material, and you can see I've kind of enlarged this part. And the back of it, though, is very, very, there's lots of beading on the back of it. So I put these two together. You know, we have these two very interesting figures. We don't know who is here. Who is the woman? Are we just looking at, are we making a judgment about her from her apparel? Are we making a judgment? We can't make a judgment about him from looking at this. But there are really ways of interpreting costuming and how we view ourselves in this world that we live in. All right, I have one more work of art. We're doing great in terms of timing. I hope this one kind of blows you away. Now you're saying to yourself, why is she showing us this photo? Right, this photo comes from the Library of Congress, and it shows African-American soldiers coming back from World War I. They were in a segregated unit. They're called the Harlem Hellfighters. They were, as I said, in a segregated US Army unit. Their motto was, "Don't tread on me." They were, this division experienced the longest continuation of frontline combat of any American unit. They were online for 112 days. Obviously, they suffered enormous losses with some 1,500 casualties. And this regiment was the first regiment to cross the Rhine River into Germany. When the war was over, the French government awarded them the Croix de Guerre, the Croix de Guerre. And these men coming home, they're on a ship coming back to America, they are wearing the Croix de Guerre. And so the French government recognized their service. And I have to tell you, it wasn't until 2021, yes, 2021, that the American government recognized their service and gave them posthumously the US Army Distinguished Service Cross. So the artist I'm going to show you next, who's made a work of art based on this photograph, wants people to know about these men. Their story is not told. I was a history major. I didn't know too much about them. I had heard about them. But she decided she's like the ultimate quilter. I'm sure some of you do quilting. So she took this photograph and created this huge quilt. I'm going to move this a little bit. So it's 11 feet by 13 feet large. It's gigantic. And she did this so that people will not forget these men. And she is one of the ultimate quilters in America today. And I have blown up a part of this so you can see it a little bit better. She uses all kinds of fabrics. Some are transparent, some are opaque. She uses fabrics from different traditions. In this one, you can't see kente cloth, but there's some of that. There is no paint on this quilt. It's all different colors of fabric. And each piece of fabric is very consciously chosen. And even the colors of the faces of the people, you know, the blue faces, I'm gonna go back. Whoops, the wrong direction. This man looks a little calmer because he is painted, his fabric is blue. These people are a little more skeptical, maybe angry. So everything she does is very intentional. People ask if she has people who help her. She has an administrative assistant, but she does all of the work herself. She's really just incredible. And if you notice, she's given them the medals, and here is the US medal, which obviously this man did not receive in his lifetime, but she wants you to remember that. And, you know, there's so much discrimination, and she really wants us to recognize that this discrimination that these men that these men faced. And she wants their personalities, however, to come through. Patricia, who's one of our NOVA LLI people, said, it's even more stunning if you can see it in person. Bisa Butler does have exhibits in many, many museums, and you can see her work, you know, in a lot of places in the United States. So if you remember that name and are able to see her work, you know, I strongly advise it. Anyway, that's the last work of art. And I just want to conclude by saying that this is the American Art website. It also has work from the Renwick, because the Renwick is part of it. You can Google anything. You can see these images. You can learn a little bit more about them. And if you notice, I took some of the samples of work that I showed you today, and I tried to make this presentation as inclusive as the curators and museum people are trying to make our collections. We're always collecting works of art by people who've been traditionally marginalized, whether they're gay or American Indian or African American or Japanese or Puerto Rican. Our collection, all of these people are part of the story of American art. And I think it's really important that we share those stories, and museums are collecting all the work more and more. I gotta say, the American Art Museum has been doing it for a long time, but it's really wonderful to see. And when people of color or people who are marginalized come to the museum, we want them to see themselves in the artwork. There's that famous little picture of that little African-American girl looking at Michelle Obama's painting. And we want people to see themselves in the artwork because all these people are part of American art. Anyway, that does it. You're welcome. Thank you. Any questions or any thoughts? I see lots of thank yous, but any questions? We have 5 more minutes.
Well, Sara, I can say you've added to your fan club. One comment was, I will attend, this person's from the Midwest, I will attend any presentation I can of this lovely Sara Shoob. Kudos and congratulations. You made a lot of connections today. It was just fabulous. I don't want to hog anybody else's comment time. Anybody else want to unmute and speak?
Yes, I wanted to ask a question. That quilt, where is that on display currently here in the DC area?
Yeah, it's at the Renwick.
At the Renwick.
And I will say it's that exhibit's closing on April 2nd.
I'll go before then. Thank you.
Right over there. Actually, yeah. I'm going to be there tomorrow at noon doing a tour.
In your spare time. In your spare time.
Not going tomorrow, but I will make it before it closes.
Yeah, it's an amazing quilt.
I wanted
so
to thank you so very, very much. As a Black woman, this just meant the world to me. And I am so glad that you included this and made us so aware of this. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm sorry, I'm Tony.
Tony, you're very welcome. And the work of African-American artists is very important in the study of American art. You know, we have an exhibit right now of self-trained artists, and many of those are African-American artists, and they would not be in an exhibit, except that they've been marginalized, you know, for decades and, you know, a century. And they're on view now. So I don't have a list of the artists And I hate to say this, but there's a recording that's available, and I did put every artist on their artwork.
Another fabulous presentation. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now, Sarah, I have one question about your necklace. Is that from the Smithsonian?
It's from a craft fair. And it's made out of felt.
Yeah, I could tell. Yeah,
right.
It's beautiful.
And I figured, I never wear jewelry anymore. What the hell? I figured I'll do a presentation and put on.
Oh yeah, you've
necklace.
worn it before, Sarah. We recognize it.
Yes.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
probably before COVID.
Yeah, a lot of color. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Fabulous presentation, as usual,
Yes.
Sarah. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Comments, questions? Well, it's been another well-spent 90 minutes, I would say. You timed it perfectly. It was just great. Yeah, you fulfilled your mission, making connections, revisiting favorites, and exploring new relationships in art. Very provocative, very thought-provoking, as I just said, very meaningful, bringing the history back, and it just makes bringing the context within some of these works have been created. It just adds so much more meaning to it. So yes, so your background coming to the fore, Sarah, and your intellectual curiosity and your passion. So it's great. Anybody else?
Thanks to all of the AARP members that joined us today. And
yes,
we will plan more of these in the future.
Wonderful.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the greatest things about the good things that came out, not greatest, one good thing that came out of COVID is that we can present programs and they can reach audiences across the country.
Yeah, wonderful.
We've had wonderful opportunities because of it. It's maybe not like going to a museum, but if you're from California, you're not going to be able to come to the Smithsonian in DC very frequently. And from even Hawaii, wow.
And even old dogs like us can learn how to Zoom. So.
We're all very good at it now. Can we tell about the first Zoom presentation we made?
You can do that, Sarah.
Okay, we had one of the, people didn't know about muting themselves and stopping the video. And so at the very first one we did, there was somebody who hadn't turned off her video and she was exercising while she was listening. And she's my friend and I'll never let her live it down.
It was so funny. It was such a distraction, but it was funny at the same time. So
right.
All right. Well, I think I'm going to shut down because I think we're all done.
Right.
You did a wonderful job. Thanks again. We'll be in touch. Thanks to everybody from ARP and LLI who made this such a wonderful afternoon. So stay well, be safe. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.